We are here at St. Francis de Sales Seminary in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And this is what is called Henny Hall. It was the original building, and it was exactly like this when Father Solanus, or Barney Casey, arrived here in 1892. You will remember that Barney had that profound experience driving the trolley car in Superior, which changed his life almost immediately, seeing a person right on the trolley tracks that was being attacked and almost killed. And he tried to help and could do very little, but that was the point where he was jolted into awareness of who he was and what God was doing, what he was meant to do. He had been, as we said, thinking about the priesthood, but hadn't really given it much reflection. And it was that moment in Superior that changed his life. He quit his job. He went to speak to his pastor at Sacred Heart, and the pastor confirmed that he thought he had a vocation and told him to come to the only Wisconsin seminary that was here in Milwaukee. Now, this seminary, which would be close to 400 miles away from Superior, was called the German Seminary. Now, in those days, in the United States, practically all the bishops were Irish, but there was historically a German triangle, so to speak, that went up to Milwaukee, over to Cincinnati, and down to St. Louis, and coming back up, except for Chicago. This was the German triangle. There were German bishops. And so everything here was taught in German. Of the 16 priests that were on the faculty here, there were only 3 when Solanus came who even spoke English. So he arrived here. You might remember, he hadn't had any high school. He had these other jobs to try to get money to help his family. So he came here at the age of 21 when most of his companions, well, all of his companions who were beginning high school were much younger. And so that he was older to begin with than his companions. He fit in very well, probably because he had such a big family, and was looked up to as a wise and caring older brother. So this is where he spent the next 4 years, arriving here in around January of 1892 and being here until 1896. So Barney Casey arrived here at St. Francis de Sales Seminary probably around January of 1892 to begin his high school and hopefully college and then theology, intending to become a diocesan priest. So when he came, pretty soon after, he also became the barber for the entire seminary, which helped him to earn a little bit of money to pay for his tuition. He also continued to have, you remember that he had diphtheria when he was younger, and his two sisters died from that. And that left him always with a throat condition, and it's called quinsy, Q-U-I-N-S-Y, and it's the kind of the inflammation of the tonsil area, and it can be painful. Well, he had that fairly frequently here, and that probably didn't help his studies either. But he started off in his studies fairly well. Remember, that was his first year of high school. He did fairly well that first year, but then as each year progressed, he did poorer. And a good bit of that is due simply to the fact that he knew no German, and everything, not just the classes, but the books, were either in German or in Latin, and all the conversation, 24 hours a day, was in German. And he was not really good in languages. And so he had to get through German, Latin to get to his English, and he fell behind in his studies. So much so that after he did complete high school and began his first year of college, the seminary professors really felt that he didn't have it intellectually to become a priest. And so they told him, maybe you're set out by God to be a religious, a brother, but not ordained. And that's when they suggested he go to visit a religious order, the Capuchins, that were also in Milwaukee. And we'll talk about that later. Well, we are in the beautiful chapel of St. Francis de Sales Seminary, which is exactly where Barney Casey, along with his fellow seminarians, would have prayed every day, and undoubtedly many times each day. It didn't look exactly like this. It was obviously renovated to reflect Vatican II, but this was always a very holy place. And in fact, it had a significant, Solanus had a significant experience later on after he left here in 1896. And then, as we'll be talking about, he entered the Capuchin order. Well, surprisingly, ironically, this is where, in this chapel, where he was ordained a subdeacon on December 8th of 1903, which was, you might remember, the 7th anniversary, December 8th, 1896, is when, after a novena with his mother and sister to the Blessed Mother in preparation for the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Barney heard these 3 words that changed his whole life: go to Detroit. And he knew that Detroit was where anyone beginning the Capuchin life would go. That's where the novitiate was. So 7 years after that event, that experience of the Blessed Mother on December 8th, 1896, he was ordained a Capuchin subdeacon here in this chapel. And interestingly, too, he was ordained by Archbishop Sebastian Mesmer, who was the brother of Father Gabriel Mesmer, the Capuchin, who was Barney Casey's, Solanus's novice master, a very wise, helpful novice master. Sebastian was Gabriel's brother, and only 2 or 3 weeks before the ordination, he was named the Archbishop of Milwaukee. But it was here, on that anniversary, that Capuchin Solanus Casey was ordained a subdeacon, the first step, a larger step toward the priesthood, subdeacon, deacon, and priesthood in those days. We are on the 5th floor of Henny Hall at St. Francis de Sales Seminary. This is completely renovated, but it was dormitories when Solanus arrived here, and he would have been in this floor, in this dormitory, probably for the first 2 years. Students arrived, and then as they progressed along the academic program each year, they went to a lower floor. So Solanus slept here, and the seminary, in its renovation, very grateful for having hosted Barney Casey for 4 years, made sure that this remembrance of him would be here forever, the picture and the relic of Solanus. But it was on this floor that he did have, more than likely, 2 years of his time here at St. Francis de Sales. We're standing at the Grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes here on the grounds of St. Francis de Sales Seminary. This was built during the seminary years of Barney Casey here at the seminary. And so even though we don't have any actual record of his coming here, we know his history enough and his love of the Blessed Mother to know that he would have spent a bit of time here at this shrine. We know his history growing up of family rosary every night, wearing the scapular, and actually helping to save a young person from drowning with the help of the scapular. One of the most beloved and well-known pictures of Solanus is in his last year at St. Bonaventure in Detroit, and it is next to the grotto there of Our Lady of Lourdes. So the Blessed Mother was always very dear to Barney Casey and then Solanus. It happened in his family way before he became a seminarian, way before he became a Capuchin, but it only increased. And so here is one of the places that had to have been very important for Solanus, and it was built for Barney Casey. It was not built for Barney Casey, but this is an important place for him in his seminary years in Milwaukee. We are at St. Francis Friary in Milwaukee. As you see at the over the doorway, St. Francis Monastery. Well, in the old days, this is what our places used to be called, and people used to think we were monks, and the places where we lived were monasteries. We are friars, as Barney Casey became friar brother Solanus Casey. Well, anyway, this is the doorway through which he came for the first time after the professors at St. Francis de Sales Seminary suggested that maybe he wasn't cut out by God to be a priest because of his intellectual problems, or their perception of his intellectual problems, but to try out religious life. And so he, at their invitation, came to visit the Capuchins at St. Francis here in Milwaukee. And this was his first visit and first knowledge of the Capuchins. And to tell the truth, he was not impressed. He did not like, in those days, we all had to wear beards after the example of Christ and St. Francis, and he didn't like that, and he really felt we were too austere, and to make matters worse, it was like going from St. Francis Seminary to this St. Francis was like going from one frying pan to the next, because these friars also all spoke German. And where would that help him if he became a Capuchin? He'd have the same troubles with studies as he had here, as he had at the seminary. So he went back after his weekend visit here at St. Francis. He went back to put things together at the seminary and to leave. And he did, and that is where he went back to St. Francis, to Superior, to be with his family, very confused, still believing, ever since that traumatic experience on the trolley in Superior, still believing that God was calling him to be a priest, but not knowing how to do it, what avenue to take. But this is where what ended up his Capuchin life began, and it really wasn't too neat a beginning. You're looking at one of the most famous photographs of Father Solanus, which was taken here right at this door by Brother Leo Wollenweber, who was his secretary and for many years a very dear friend and confidant. It was one of the few times, really, after his ordination that Father Solanus had the opportunity to come back to Milwaukee, to St. Francis. The reason for that visit was that one of the friars that he had lived with in New York and had died, there was a cause for his canonization that had begun. His name was Father Stephen Eckert, and after being in New York with Father Solanus, he came to Milwaukee and was considered really the founder, even though he didn't begin it. He began the St. Benedict the Moor parish, which was the first Catholic parish for African Americans in the state of Wisconsin. It began as an African American parish. It did not turn into And so there was great history, and Father Solanus came because there was a beautiful statue of Stephen Eckert that was being blessed on that day at St. Benedict the Moor. And he stayed here at St. Francis, and Brother Leo took this very famous now picture. This is the friars' chapel, or sometimes called choir, that now Frater Solanus, after having made his novitiate in Detroit, he came here right after making his first vows as a Capuchin, which would have been in January of 1898. So his first visit here, at the suggestion of the professors at the seminary, his first visit here was in the spring of 1896. He wasn't impressed, as I told you. Never expected to come back. But as we know, the Lord and the Blessed Mother had different plans. And he heard December 8th, 1896, go to Detroit. And having been here at St. Francis for that short visit, he knew that if you were going to be a Capuchin, you started off in Detroit. He knew exactly what that meant. So he went to Detroit, arriving on Christmas Eve, 1896, and was there for his entire novitiate with the novice master Gabriel Mesmer and 4 or 5 other novices. He made his profession in January of 1898, and immediately with the other newly professed came here to live at St. Francis. And so he lived here from 1898 until the summer of 1904. So he lived here for 6 years. And this is where he and the entire community would have their morning, evening prayer, and other hours of the day be gathered for Eucharist and other hours of the liturgy. He spent much time in this chapel. And one of the things that he was delegated to do as a young friar was to take care of the altar here and in the large church, which is just on the other side of this wall, and then for the parish community, also to take care of the servers, which ended up being a preparation for his first ministries after he was ordained, when he was sent to Yonkers to Sacred Heart Parish and took care of the servers as one of his first ministries. So this is where his professed Capuchin life began, and with much of the time in this St. Francis Chapel.